So for those of you who are more interested in looking at PowerPoint slides for the presentation, this might be a useful way to, have a brief overview of the module itself. So we often use the word know all the time. For instance, I know that being late all the time creates a lot of social and work problems. But what does it really mean to know something? And there's more in your study guide as to what knowledge is, and your textbook talks to you about it too. So the question is, why is research important for evidence-informed practice? Again, the meaning of evidence-informed practice is the fact that there is evidence informing what you must do to be successful. And this is an example from your textbook. And there's an activity in your study guide which is of a very similar nature, and the hope is that you will go through the activity. There are objectives for this first lecture, which comprises the first two chapters. So you have to be able to describe research literacy as an issue related to health and community practice, and to be able to describe the definitions and history of research literacy for professional practitioners. There are several key terms, and of course, the hope is that by the end of this module, you are quite familiar with how to read and use a textbook, and not just your textbook, but your study guide as well. There are several key terms that will be covered throughout the course, and definitely you will see the definitions for almost all of this in the first module itself. So we won't talk more about the key terms, because this is meant to be a nutshell version of what basically you will be encountering through this module. A lot of this first module is based on understanding research literacy, which is an essential competency for evidence-informed practice. It is essentially the ability to locate, understand, and critically evaluate evidence for application and practice. Of course, research literacy is simply one of the characteristics of being research-minded, which is a larger umbrella of skills that one must have. And there are several properties to research-mindedness, which you will see in chapter 1 of your textbook. It's understanding the relevance of research to practice, abilities to draw research to inform practice, various research approaches and strategies, and knowing about them, and appreciation of strengths and limitations of different research methods, and so on. There are several steps instrumental to research literacy. These steps may be found in your textbook again. It's a total of 9 different steps, and the key thing to remember is, unless you are able to have mastery over all of these steps, you cannot be research literate. This is a figure that shows up in probably every chapter or every other chapter of your textbook. So it is important to understand that this model is this is the model that the authors like to use to talk about evidence-informed decision-making process. You first define the problem, you search for solutions using literature search, you appraise what you have found through the search process. Once you appraise what you found and you've picked what you need to use, you synthesize your curated or sifted through information that you adapt and implement for practice. And then, of course, you evaluate it, see if it's effective or not. If it is not, you redefine your challenge and go through the process again. It is iterative. So research literacy enables to do a bunch of things, right? It enables you to be conversant in the process of evidence-informed decision-making, which supports your ability to communicate with other professionals and clients. It allows you to remain current and reflective and critical and responsive in your line of work. It allows us to make the best possible choices and provide the best possible care or interventions. and lets us be a better consumer and an advocate of best use of healthcare resources. These are critical questions presented in your textbook. Consider a recently learned skill, observation in practice, experience as a service user. What are some issues that might need research from your field of practice or discipline? There are other questions addressing research literacy and research capacity. Make sure you go through the critical questions in the back, critical thinking questions. They're important to help you absorb the content better. They make you a more reflective reader, and you get the most out of the course by doing that. As you move on to Chapter 2, we learn how to describe what we know. We are able to describe different forms of knowledge. We're able to distinguish between information and information literacy. We are able to explain what is considered to be evidence and how evidence is formulated through research. And finally, describe researchable questions and the research process. There are several elements of knowledge that both your textbook and the study guide will talk about. We will be discussing different forms of knowledge. We'll be talking about the specific differences between explicit and tacit knowledge. We will also be talking about professional or experiential knowledge. In addition, what we don't cover in this slide is the role of personal knowledge itself. Knowledge is different from information. One of the sections in the study guide and the textbook talks about the differences between information and knowledge, and also what it means to be information literate. Other discussions revolve around evidence and the importance of evidence. While your textbook goes ahead and points out the difference between research and evidence-informed practice, I think that research is simply a precursor to evidence-informed practice, so really making the distinction is not legitimate. Evidence-informed practice is a downstream consequence of research itself. Do not worry about the course outline. This does not refer to you since this is an online course. Key terms that you will learn from Chapter 2 are epistemology, evidence, explicit propositional knowledge, information knowledge, operationalize research, research process, research questions, etc. The research process has several steps. It is a precursor to the creation of knowledge itself. So this is, again, well explained in your textbook. You will recognize that it is a systematic method of coming to a conclusion. Again, the promised wheel of decision making, defining the problem, searching for solutions, appraising all the possible solutions, synthesizing the response, adapting the response, implementing the response, and evaluating the response, and going back to the definition if necessary. Common types of research questions and methods of research studies to address them are also discussed in this chapter and in this module. Once again, look at the critical questions at the end of the chapter. Try to answer them. They're important and go a long way in you thinking about